Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India. Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste, welcome to the second session of this course. You might remember the first session we talked about how our professional context is evolving and how we need a very different sets of the competencies. We also talked about the criticality of self management in attaining success and retaining success in our life and in our career. We looked at well-being as sign of management of self and management of career, and we also reflected on how Indian data, particularly the youth data, suggests about the state of well-being and state of flourishing in India. In this course, we are going to look at why positive psychology and yoga have to be part of this course. To understand this, we need to understand how evolution, human evolution takes place, and we are mostly talking about the psychological evolution. Human evolution is result of some adaptive behaviors. These adaptive behaviors were developed, were demonstrated, they became like pattern by avoiding harm and injuries, or rather we can say these are the result of avoiding harms and injuries, and also result of seeking optimal experience, positive experience, creative experiences of life. So, both of these types of stimulants we can say, or both of these types of tendencies have resulted into human evolution. We have to develop some mechanism which were actually result of our tendency, our need to avoid harm and injuries. For example, as human beings are and were evolving, they were facing many challenges coming from the natural environment, from the animals, or from fellow human beings who might be competing for the resources. So, as a result of constantly living in testing environment, they naturally develop the tendency of suspicion, tendency of hoarding things, tendency of developing some attachment, then only they could fight for those resources which they were hoarding. So, all these things were result of avoiding harms. Functional distress mechanism also developed in this process to check the infidelity of the partner, to look at some cunning members in the community who might steal the resources which one human being, one family has adopted, has acquired. So, as a result of that, functional distress mechanism naturally developed. Lot of competitive, lot of games were actually very ruthless competition. They were zero sum game. Only one person could win. It is very different from win-win kind of games we see particularly in the corporate world. The whole business world rather is actually based on the notion of win-win. Someone gets money, someone gets a good. That is an exchange process. That is supposed to be, and that was designed to be, a win-win process. There were not many win-win games as human beings were evolving, as we can say caveman was evolving. So, as a result of that, tendency for anger, competition, again the allurement, manipulation, all these things had to be naturally developed. So, we have developed these tendencies as we have evolved. David Buss, I have primarily taken these insights from the work of David Buss. The reference is given in this slide. We are not only though have evolved through avoiding harm and injuries, we have also evolved by seeking optimal experiences of being alive, being connected and being creative. These tendencies are very well captured in the Ryan and Dacey's work on self-determination theory. What self-determination theory says is that human beings have tendency or urge, natural urge to look for building competence. And you can see human beings as they have evolved not only have defended themselves, not only they have survived the competition, they have built very different type of competencies, starting from use of the fire, use of the very rudimentary instruments, making the shades, making shelters, developing the process of agriculture. All these are at one level are result of tendency of human being to develop competency. They also have tendency for belonging. That is how the families were born. Initially families were developed as biological units, but later on families became social unit and many social units started becoming communities. So, this need for belongingness resulted into the formation of the communities, establishing of the villages, building of the states, all that happened because of this need for belongingness. Human beings also have tendency and urge to exercise autonomy, to experience autonomy. The science for large part of it was aiming at winning over nature. This tendency is a reflection of seeking autonomy, and as a result of that they challenge the most difficult environment, they challenge the most difficult challenges, and they develop using competencies. They started human beings want to have more and more autonomy on whatever they wish to carry out. So, our evolution is result of avoiding harm as well as seeking positive experiences. Naturally, any science or any field of study which is aiming at studying human mind will naturally look at the behaviors and tendencies resulting from these two natural urges or natural evolutionary needs. So, psychology is not different from that. Inherently, the three mission of psychology as defined by the founders William James, Wundt or Freud, generally the mission of psychology was to be understood, and William James, who is the father of functionalist school of psychology, articulated it very emphatically. It says that mission of psychology is curing mental illness, making the lives of all people more fulfilling and identifying and nurturing talent. You can look at in these missions we have captured both the types of evolutionary tendencies. We have captured the tendencies which have resulted into the human personality and human functioning by the process of avoiding harms, and we also look at elements which are result of natural tendency of human being to seek belongingness, developing competency and acquiring autonomy. As field of psychology has grown, and Seligman in his landmark paper on American psychologist, which he has written, which is co-authored with Chick and Mihai, they have explained this process that in the at the time of and after Second World War, some major changes took place. large number of war veterans were coming back after the war, during the war, and there was a need for their psychological rehabilitation. Naturally, they have seen violence, they were part of the massive violence, many shocking traumatic experiences, and that resulted into many psychological ailments. That was the need of that time to focus on the ailments, on the problems, and that was observed by psychologists of that time, and they also found that by studying ailments they can get research support grants. Because of this need, a massive effort was directed amongst the psychologists to undervalue the different types of ailments and also developing ways of dealing with those, and they were very successful. We have a massive data and massive documentation of the mental disorders and their symptoms as well as how they can be treated. But later on it was realized that treatment of illness is not equivalent to preventing that, that is number one. Secondly, treatment of illness and nurturing talent, which is mission of the psychology, or making the lives more fulfilling, which is another mission of psychology, that these things are not equivalent. Treating ailment is different, helping people to live more fulfilling life and developing their talents are different. In the next session, we will also look at in the form of a picture that positive psychology is not dealing with the ailment, it is actually above the zero line. So, normal situation is, if we consider that as zero line, above the zero line is where positive psychology belongs. But a large part of the evolution since 1940s of the field happened on below the line phenomena, which are mainly related to mental disorder and ailments. This thing was pointed out by Martin Seligman in his presidential speech in the American Psychological Association, and he and his team called for diverting the attention of the field towards possibilities, towards the greater competencies, towards those aspects of life which make life worth living. And that was the call which was the result of recognizing that treating ailment and achieving great life and realizing our humanity, realizing the essence of the humanness in our life, these are two different things. Here I would like to quickly give an introduction of the positive psychology, how it is understood mostly in the current times, and then we will move on to the cultural nuances and how role of yoga has emerged and eventually became part of this course. So, here I would like to mention about Abraham Maslow, Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi's work. Abraham Maslow obviously was much before the Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi's work. Abraham Maslow is mentioned here because he was the very renowned psychologist who did his writings in the 50s and 60s. Most of you must be familiar to his need hierarchy theory, but many of you may not also be familiar that he was the person who first time in a very articulate ways talked about holism, meta needs and the self-actualizing tendency of human being. All these are very positive in nature. He talked about holistic perspective of looking at psychology. He critiqued the atomistic functional view of the world, and he claimed that he warned that psychology should not suffer from it, and called for not only developing holistic perspective, but also developing research methods which can understand the human being in its holistic nature. And holistic means it cannot be reduced to stimulus and response, it cannot be reduced to simple few tendencies which someone has acquired in the childhood and looking at human being as a dynamic, constantly evolving entity. He talked about the meta needs, which is beyond the basic needs, which need not be satisfied. He talked about self actualization, and in order to fulfill the meta needs in self actualization, human beings can forego even the lower level needs. These all things were appeared in Abraham Maslow's writing, but probably it was not carried out in a very empirical way, at least in the famous American psychologist paper of 2001, Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi point out that, and they say that Abraham Maslow and other psychologists who are termed as humanistic psychologists, their work at number one, it became much more self centric, and number two, not much empirical inquiry was carried out to take forward that work. Whatever may be the reason, Seligman and his colleague were able to articulate the positive psychology in a very emphatic way. Currently, positive psychology, the aim of positive psychology is claimed by the leaders of the field as achieving flourishing, and flourishing is understood to be in terms of an acronym PARMA that stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning in life and accomplishment. So, positive psychology is a study of flourishing. Naturally, the well-being is reflection of flourishing, but it is not only personal well-being, it is relationship as well as meaning in life as well. It also aims at studying the conditions to flourish, conditions and processes that contribute to flourishing and optimal functioning of people, groups and institutions. So, here you see evolving from the humanistic psychology, positive psychology not only focuses on people, it also focuses on flourishing groups and thriving communities, evolving institutions. Naturally, as the emergence of the field itself is result of this process, this is not, and this is very different from treating illness. It is based on the fundamental insights that treating mental illness is not same thing as promoting mental health. It is very solution focused. It is not merely corrective and limited to offering solution only when things go downhill, but it is telling people what should be the attitude, what activities they can carry out, what interventions can be done to not only attain flourishing, but also retaining flourishing. In the recent review, they have identified 51 types of 51 different interventions systematically studied in the positive psychology. So, when this special issue of American psychologists about positive psychology appeared, it attracted major reactions, lot of positive reactions. Almost everybody welcomed this move of a field of psychology to study the things of life which makes it worth living, looking at the potential of human being, looking at the possibilities of the human nature, all that was widely appreciated. It was also critiqued on being very ethnocentric. So, there are large number of scholars who pointed out this aspect, and Christopher and Hickenbottom have captured the essence of many scholars who have mentioned about the ethnocentric perspective not being inclusive nature of the positive psychology field as was reflected in that particular issue, in that special issue where 15 articles on different aspects of the positive psychology was published. So, what Christopher and Hickenbottom write that current efforts in positive psychology are deconstructed to reveal an adherence to the dominant Western conception of self and its accompanying vision of the good life as personal fulfillment. So, they pointed out that there are many cultures which can have different notion of self, which is very different from the notion of self held by the liberal or neoliberal societies of the western world. Essentially, they questioned that positive psychology cannot be universal, or the way it is presented cannot be universal because of three things. Number one, vision of world is different in different cultures. What is the vision of world? That we are going to look at in the second in the next slide. Notion of self is itself is different, which arises from the world view or vision of the world. Notion of self, what is self? That itself is different, that understanding itself is different in different cultures. As a result of that, the very conception of happiness and what makes good life also differs. So, how can there be a universal positive psychology, or if at all there is a need and there can be a universal positive psychology, we need to do more thorough job, we need to have more cultural perspectives, we need to have examining the basic assumptions of the current formulations of positive psychology more thoroughly, using cultural lenses to make it more inclusive, so that it can become more generalizable, or if I may use this word, more universal. So, first thing we look at the world view. This notion of Christopher and Hickenbottom is based on the work of Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor in 1989 wrote a very interesting piece on modernity and emergence of self, and he talks about two types of worldview prevalent in the world. What is worldview? Worldview is basic assumptions, belief, values about how this world is and how it works. So, Taylor point out that different cultures have different worldview, and they can be merged and they can be summarized in a term called one tier worldview or single tier worldview and two tier worldview. One tier worldview suggests that world is what is visible, human being is what is visible, what is experienced, what is empirical, what is objectively verifiable, and the happiness and responsibility of the life is solely lying in the individual inner situation. It is on the individual where the responsibility of his or her happiness lies. That is the one tier worldview. But two tier worldview, which was prescribed by most of the cultures, particularly before modernization and so called enlightenment in the 16th 17th century, it talks about two worldviews. It talks about two tier worldview. Greeks, Balinese and Indians, these three examples can point out this aspect. Greek, they used to believe in having a life of necessity, which is the necessary biological survival situation. That is one world, and there is another world, the world of called eugen, which is good life, which is life of citizens beyond necessities, life of the citizen which make society worth living. That makes the essential human nature of the humanity. These cultures are talking about more objective reality, which is more based on biological survival or at max social needs, and also a transcendental aspect of the world. These cultures also believe, and many cultures still hold that belief, that it is the transcendental reality which imbue the value and meaning to the mundane, so called mundane reality. So, Balinese and Bali is greatly influenced by Indian culture as well. They talk about Sekala and Niskala. Sekala is again a reflection of the ordinary realm of everyday life experiences, and Niskala is the spiritual world. that is deeper level of reality, that is invisible to the untrained, but ultimately determines what occurs in daily life. And what is sadhana? Sadhana is the process of unraveling that what Balinese called Niskala and Indians called Paravidya. Indians say Paravidya and Aparavidya. Paravidya refers to the higher learning. Para is beyond. Apara is not, which is not beyond, which is immediately accessible through our senses. So, para refers to higher learning, learning related to self or ultimate truth, that is transcendental knowledge. So, here the self is used, and Professor S.K. Chakravarti used it beautifully. He wrote that small self with small s and self with capital S. Self with small s is born by our identity, about our physicality, about our social circle, and governed by individual ego. Whereas self with the capital S is the real self, where nature, all the creatures and the whole cosmos is included. Realizing that thing, realizing that inherent oneness, what is called non-duality, underneath diverse form of nature, knowledge of that is called Paravidya. That governs the so called mundane life, which is perceptible through our senses. And this culture believed that what is life is much beyond my sense perceptions, but studying that also is important, because we have to do the agriculture, we have to set up temples, we have to construct things, people have to build their family, society has to have norms, there has to be exchange of things, business has to be developed. So, apara vidya is also important, but that apara vidya is, in a very tentative way, we are calling it lower knowledge. It is not considered lower in Indian tradition, but it is certainly not considered ultimate. It is not considered that about which Rishi of Upanishad says that knowing which nothing else is left to be known. There is a story in the Upanishad where a child comes, where a boy comes after receiving education from his guru. He comes back to see his father, and father was working in a garden, and just while working in the garden, he looked at his son. He asked, okay, so have your education is completed? He said yes, and then father asked, but have you got something, have you come to? So he says that, boy, we are Brahmins. By definition, Brahmins means those who know the Brahman, those who know the ultimate reality, those who have the access to Paravidya. So we are Brahmins, and we are supposed to have the knowledge of Brahman, and that is what is the ultimate knowledge. So have you known something that after knowing which nothing left is to be known? That aspect of Paravidya is the ultimate realization of human potential. That is why it is called self-realization, but that self-realization has S as capital, because that is the real self. Brahman is the real self, Atman is, Jivatman is, but a sense of self which is result of the sense of separation arising from ignorance. This aspect of the worldview, what Charles Taylor calls two-tier worldview, is present, was present, has been present in most of the cultures before modernization. But what is the worldview being prescribed in the existing literature of positive psychology? That is reflected in the form of definition of self, basic assumption of self is reflected in their work. So, positive psychology is currently largely based on dominant Western and particularly American ideologies, and Christopher and Hickinbottom write that it is clear that it is based on Cartesian distinction. What is Cartesian distinction? That is the thought given by that great scientist that subjective world and objective world are different. Realm of science is to deal with the objective world, objective reality. Anything which is not in the objective reality, anything which is not objectively verifiable is not the matter of science. So, it is not the matter of knowledge, it can be a matter of belief. Notion of fixed and essential self is also evident in the writings of positive psychology. Thirdly, it talks about meaning and values are subjective in nature and person should be free to determine both the meaning of and means to pursue the good life. And Christopher and Heckingbottom point out different questionnaires, different psychometric assessment tools to study well-being, to study even flourishing, and then they suggest, they point out that though these questionnaires are having element of other orientation, they have the element of including so called others, but what gives meaning to life is largely understood to be the choice of human being. There is no great meaning as such universally, it is human being and dependent on his tendency or her tendency to find something meaningful or not. So, the means to pursue the good life or happiness in whatever manner they choose, that is the basic assumption, and they should choose as long as, and they can choose anything as long as that do not interfere with the ability of others to do the same. And this third aspect actually emanate from the first two distinctions and first 2 points of difference. That aspect is meaning of good life. What is considered to be meaning of good life and what is considered to be life satisfaction can also be different in different cultures. So, happiness is the fundamental goal of life. If this statement of Chick and Mihai is there in the landmark paper of positive psychology in the American Psychologist 2001, the special issue, it is not so quite so simple, because there are cultures and that it has been throughout the history where individual satisfaction has generally taken a back seat to the goals, purposes, priorities of large collectives, and that when emotional satisfaction has been experienced, it is often of different kind. That is not derived from the internal positive emotions, but that satisfaction is derived from living according to the social order, which is typically situated within the broader cosmological framework. Why someone is doing sacrifice for teaching kids, why someone has to sacrifice for protecting a community, why someone has to create something where the larger members of the society can come, assemble, do good things, all these are the result of selfless actions. All cultures appreciate that. If we look at most of the social development and maybe even technological development is result of some human being operating and taking pain, some human being actually sacrificing their personal satisfaction, sacrificing their emotional satisfaction to create something which can create eventually value for the larger society, for the larger mankind. And that is not very well captured, because I may find meaning in that, but someone may claim that they find meaning in just pursuing hedonistic pleasure. So, that distinction is not there in the assessment of the well-being, in the assessment of the flourishing, and that is what is being pointed out by Christopher and Heckingbottom. We can understand this point by looking at some of the Indian examples. if we look at the happiness, if we look at flourishing, and if we search these terms in the Indian tradition, we come across these three words: Sukha, Shanti, Anand. Sukha word come from satisfaction of the senses. Why? Because Kha reflects the indriyas, the senses, action related and perception related senses. Sense satisfaction, su upasarg, su prefix reflects the positivity, the favorableness. So, convenience and pleasure experience of the senses is sukh. And you must have heard people giving blessings to their younger ones, sukhi raho. But sukh is not considered to be the ultimate aim of life. There is something higher than sukh, what we understand to be shanti. Shanti word come from the root word sham. Sham means equanimity. Sama means equanimity, sama means more calmness. Calmness of what? Calmness of negativities of life. In our tradition, we call the dukkha or the anxieties can be because of the adhidaivik, adhibhautik and adhyatmic reason. Adhyatmic, which is higher realm of self, adhibhautik means extended life of the physicality, and adhidaivik is the my role in the larger scheme of things. Wherever there is some traction in these three aspects, anxiety emerges, which result into stress. So, we call for shanti. Shanti is attaining the calmness from all the three type of dukkha. It is also, and you must have noticed, after the mantras we say shanti 3 times: Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Whether you go in north, south, western part of India, wherever there is some, in all spiritual traditions this practice is followed. Whenever we say Shanti 3 times, it is indication of shaman or calmness or going down of the dukkha which are of adhidaivik nature, adhyatmic nature and adhibhautik nature. It is also reflection of the shanti and calmness at all three shariras, 3 levels of existence of our individual self: sthul sharir, which is physical body; sukshma sharir, which is subtle, which is made up of our sense of vitality, emotions, rationality; and karan sharir, which is understood to be the substratum over which all the play of life is going on. So, shanti at all 3 levels. Many of you must have heard shanti mantra, which is generally recited after all yogic as well as Vedic protocols. It says Om Dyau Shanti, Antariksh Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Rapah Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspataya Shanti. No stress, no anxiety, all calmness in all spheres of life, whether it is Aushadhi, whether it is medicine, whether it is universe, whether it is Antariksh, whether it is space, everywhere there is a prayer for calmness and going away of anxieties. So, this is also a reflection that attaining individual shanti is not possible. My individual shanti is connected to the shanti of whole universe. So, my duty does not stop. The good life cannot be achieved just by ensuring that I get satisfaction and pleasure and all the conveniences. Until I make conscious effort, until my surroundings are also in comfort, are in calmness, are not suffering from anxiety, I cannot attain that calmness. So, my shanti is connected with the shanti of my surroundings. That surrounding include natural environment as well as social environment. So, you can say Shanti is an inclusive term. There is no individual Shanti or individual Sukh is possible, but individual Shanti is not possible. Then there is another term which is called Anand. Anand word comes from Nand, which is means alhad, ecstasy, and with the upsarg, with the prefix a. That alhad is the moment of forgetfulness of self. Ecstasy are the state of mind which is beyond wakefulness, which is Jagrati. It is beyond the Swapna, which is dream stage, and it can also be, it happens to be at the deep sleep stage, and it can also be deeper than the deep sleep stage. That is Ananda. We all experience that in the deep sleep, but how it can be experienced in the wakefulness stage, and how even there is a possibility of fourth stage beyond wakefulness, dream and sleep. That is where the real Anand, the real positive experience of life occurs, and that is the claim of Indian psychology. That is the objective of yoga practices that is not captured in the existing literature of positive psychology. We can take another example where Sukha and Shanti may not be there, but still they are considered to be very important pursuits of life. In order to fulfill the kartavya, duty, there are studies suggesting, and our conception of the kartavya also suggests, that we are not having individual life experience, we are all living roles. We have roles as the member of family, as member of community, as member of larger social and environmental ecosystem. So, we have kartavya towards all, because of all this life exists. And in order to following kartavya, in order to following duty, I may have to forego my pleasure. And what is appreciated in the yogic tradition or Vedic tradition is foregoing the individual pleasure for the individual kartavya. Then there is another step called sadhana. Sadhana is systematically going through the hardship to develop more self-control, so that you can develop deeper Shanti, and people report that that will result into Anand, which is ecstatic state, and which is much deeper than the Sukha. In between comes term tapas. Tapas is the process of attaining that selflessness, that process of attaining that commitment for the larger purpose, and if required even experiencing pain in that process. That pain is appreciated. So, these terms reflect that what is considered to be good life and what is considered to be emotional satisfaction and well-being can be different in different cultures. And because of this difference, Walsh in the reaction to the special issue of American psychologist wrote in 2001 that though psychologies of Buddhism and yoga lack information on the nature and treatment of major psychopathologies, however, they contain a wealth of information on exceptional psychological health, post-conventional transpersonal development, and exceptional abilities and the methods of cultivating them. A large body of research, several hundred studies on meditation alone suggest that meditation and yoga have effects ranging across psychology, physiology, biochemistry, and can enhance both psychological health as well as physical health, and sometimes it can take physical and psychological health to the exceptional degree. This is the real pursuit of above the bottom line above the normal stage, above the coping and adjusting of life. It is much beyond that which is aimed at in the yogic tradition, and that is true in many traditions in the world as well. Certainly Buddhist tradition also is one of them. So, what is this notion of self in the yoga? Notion of self in yoga can be derived, can be understood from the Panchakosha. Our self is not Panchakosha. World has all Panchakosha. We experience these koshas through the corresponding koshas of our self. There is a beautiful story in the Upanishad. A boy goes to a father, goes to a student, wants to understand the ultimate reality, the Paravidya. He is a pursuant of Paravidya, yeah, Eugen, if in the Greek term we say, that is the universal order of things, which is the substratum of all of whatever is going on and visible through the physical senses. He says, I wish to understand that. And Guru asks him to go back and reflect. He comes back, he says, food is the essence, because when I missed food, all cells of my body, all parts of my body was started craving for that. It cannot sustain without food. So, Anna is the Brahma, and that is how the Anna was recognized as the expression of Brahma. Then the story goes on, and the five koshas, the notion of five kosha, notion of the five aspect of Brahma emerges. Adi Shankaracharya then systematized it and presented as notion of self. Nonetheless, we will look at the difference in the metaphysics of the Advaita Vedanta and the Sankhya to some degree to understand and clarify this notion, but nutshell at this stage we can understand. So, we can understand the notion of self through the notion of Panchakosha as explained in the as explained by Adi Shankaracharya, and this is drawn from the description given in the Upanishad. Our self is made up of, or our self is constituted by Annamaya Kosh, Pranamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh, Vijnanamaya Kosh and Anandamaya Kosh. Physical body, energy body, emotional aspect of the body, rational aspect of the body and bliss aspect of the body. Physical body, that is made up of Anna, that is made up of food, that is why perhaps it is called Annamaya Kosh. These are all the layers of the ultimate reality, which is Brahman, which is the real essence of the self. But we do not understand, so we understand self as the small self with the small s, but the tapas and sadhana is required to understand ourselves as the self with the capital S, which is Brahman. That Brahman, that ultimate reality is enveloped through Anna, that constitute the physical body, through Prana, which is called the energy body, which is the reflected in the terms like subjective vitality, chi, chi. In many traditions these terms are used. In the Indian tradition, prana word is used. So, Pranamaya Kosh is nurtured by Prana Shakti, and pranayam is the process, the breathing exercises is the process of nurturing Pranamaya Kosh. Then there is a layer of Manomaya Kosh, emotional aspect of self. Emotions, feelings, likes, dislikes, fears, phobia, these are all the daily life, daily mind, that is called as daily mind. Underneath the daily mind is the higher mind that controls the senses, that is the inner conscience, inner voice, values, belief system, intellect, that constitutes the Vijnanamaya Kosh. Underneath the Vijnanamaya Kosh comes the Anandamaya Kosh, the bliss, that is our ultimate nature. That is where Sankhya and Vedantists both agree ultimate nature of human being is ananda, bliss. Because of the ignorance, we start identifying that which is non-self, and the process of sadhana and tapas is to not getting identified with the lower selves or non-self. If we are following Vedantic tradition, we will say non-self. If we are following the Sankhya tradition, we will say no self, lower self. That process is sadhana and the yoga sadhana. Mind is the tool for that. That is reflected in the Ashtanga Yoga, particularly in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. These 5 layers make 3 shareers, 3 bodies. Sthul sharir, gross body, Annamaya, made up of Annamaya Kosh. Then comes the Sukshma sharir, subtle body, that is made up of Pranamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh, Vijnanamaya Kosh. These are not the rigid boundaries, these are not the rigid identities. It is like a spectrum. Our physicality, we all know, is deeply connected to our emotionality. Our emotionality is deeply connected to our rationality. We can't distinguish here rationality ends and emotionality starts. It is not possible. So, that is why it is more like a spectrum. In that spectrum, third sharir, third body is Karan sharir, causal body. Causal body is the cause of all this. That is the ultimate cause. That is layered. The layers are not fully peeled yet, but it can be experienced. The Anandamaya Kosh is experienced either in the deep sleep. In the deep sleep, we are that self which is experienced in the deep sleep is Anandamaya Kosh. You also must have noticed that in the dream stage, your subtle body is active. Subtle body has subtle senses as well. Antahindriya and Bahirindriya. External senses which are visible, eyes, nose, ears, these are all external senses, but there are corresponding internal senses as well. That is why it is called subtle, that is why it is called sukshma, which is not visible, but it is there. So, there is a subtle eye, subtle ear, subtle nose, and where do we experience that? We experience that in the dream stage, because in the dream stage our eyes are closed, our external eyes are closed, but we still see things. So, there must be some internal eyes, there must be some internal ears. So, that subtle aspect is experienced in the dream state, and Annamaya Kosh is the Sthul Sharir. That aspect is the most immediate experience of self. The first time we experience ourself, the most immediate aspect of experiencing self is the physical body. So, all 3 bodies are important. All 3 bodies constitute human experience of phenomena called human being. If we look at the positive psychology, it has started giving attention to psychosomatic aspect of the positivity. So, interoception, body mind practices are now getting importance, now getting recognition. Still there is not much study on the pranamaya kosh or the energy feeling and energy experience of our day to day life. So, that is where the importance of yoga comes. Maslow talked about holistic methods and holistic interventions. Yoga provides holistic methods and holistic interventions. There is a recognition that body and mind are deeply integrated and connected. Our ability to perceive outside things is as important as our ability to perceive what is going on within. That is interoception. That interoception is also deeply connected with our psychosomatic intelligence. So, yoga gives insights about those fundamental life experiences, and that is why it can be beautifully integrated with the current understanding of the positive psychology. So, Professor Bhavuk and Professor Salgame also explain this point in these terms and in this diagram. This diagram is taken from the very famous book of Professor Bhavuk, Spirituality and Indian Psychology. and these points are taken from Professor Salgame's paper on positive psychology and Indian psychology, birds of the same feather. So, Professor Salgame seems to be aiming at integration of positive psychology and Indian psychology, and Professor Bhavuk is explicating the notion of self as it can be distilled from the Indian traditional wisdom. So, if you look at this diagram, it gives the notion of self. So, we looked at the notion of self as predominantly pronounced, subscribed in the existing literature of positive psychology as explained by Christopher and Heckenbottom in his paper. Professor Bhavuk gives the notion of self in this diagram. You start looking at this diagram from the central most, the thickest circle, that is the reflection of the physical body, that is Annamaya Kosh. Sense organ are less thick, they are reflection of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue. So, these are the sense organs that constitute our self. Subtler than the physical self and sense organ is our manas, and man includes buddhi, man includes Vijnanamaya Kosh as well as Manomaya Kosh in this model. That gives the ahankar, the sense of identity. Identity gives the attachment to things. Ahankar is also the outer layer to buddhi. Buddhi is the intellect and Atman is the core of that. All this is constantly interacting with the others, so called others as well, others in the social environment as well as natural environment. So, social self is evolved through the interaction of all these selves. We interact with social and natural environment through our intellect, through our emotions, through our physicality. So, all these three aspects give birth to our social self. What we look at, even as a cursory view, yoga recognizes the inherent divinity and purity in man and possibility of attaining an ideal state of well-being, which is not only emotional satisfaction, which is rather beyond emotional satisfaction and certainly beyond pleasure, which is about Shanti and Anand, which are the higher realms of the well-being. It can be experienced in our day-to-day life, in the ordinary vocations of life. In the very famous lecture on practical Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda also says that the greatest truth revealed in the Vedanta are not explicated by only the sages living in the forest. They are explicated by the kings as well, people, those in the thick of action, those who are in the ordinary vocations of life, that can be experienced. Yoga offers a holistic model of human self. It offers a self-correct, it offers large number of self-corrective techniques as well to restore our normalcy, achieving the ecstasy, remaining at that and still remaining in the day-to-day life. In the Indian tradition, spiritual practices of various kinds are aided. So, at one level positive psychology prescribed to so many interventions, but Indian psychology, Vedic tradition not only prescribed the interventions, it also prescribed what type of people, what types of personality may be benefited most by what type of interventions. And as a result of that, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga emerged. 8 aspects of Patanjali Yoga also talks about diversity and diversity of attaining the highest level, which is Kaivalya, and also diversity of individuals, diversity of practices. So, that is the reason we found that integrating yoga with the positive psychology can be very fruitful pursuit for a course on managing self and managing career. At this stage I would like to quote the work of Cain Wilber. It is slight digression, but it is useful. I am using this work of Cain Wilber at this stage because till now we looked at what is the nature, objectives and aims of positive psychology. Then we also looked at how different cultures can have difference in the basic assumptions being followed about the self, about the notion of good life in the existing literature of positive psychology. How yoga can possibly give more holistic perspective and can be also integrated with positive psychology to attain the objectives, ultimate objective of the course and ultimate objective of our life, managing self and managing career. So, Cain Wilber also subscribed this notion of Panchakosha, and he also has understood all these koshas as different layers of minds. He points out that different therapies arising from different schools of psychology are actually more efficient in treating at some level of mind or some level of kosha. So, for example, simple counseling and supportive therapy, they focus at the persona level. Psychoanalysis, psychodrama, transaction analysis, reality theory, ego psychology, and many of you must be familiar to some or all of these theories and therapies. They are primarily focused, according to Cain Wilber, at the ego level, at the psychosomatic primarily ego level. At the social self, which is the result of interaction of the pranamaya, all the koshas, particularly the 3 koshas of the subtle body with our social and natural environment, there are therapies which are aiming at that. He call it Sanchora or total organism, and total organism is very close to the social self, what Professor Bhavuk talks about. Bioenergetic analysis, Rosarian therapy, Gestalt therapy, existential analysis, logotherapy, humanistic psychology, these are related to the a total organism which include koshas and environment both. And then there are spiritual traditions, Vedanta Hinduism, Taoism, Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, they are looking at the non-duality and unity consciousness, which is the layer at Anandamaya Kosh and beyond that. Though Cain Wilber has not used the word Ashtanga Yoga, we can infer, and this framework was prepared many decades ago. Now we have sufficient research to substantiate the inclusion of the Ashtanga Yoga in this schema, and we can know more about it in the later courses. And this book, the very famous and profound book of Dr. Rishi Vivekananda, is also mentioned here. It explains how yoga interventions, asanas and pranayam can have the impact, can have the positive impact on all the 5 koshas. So, this practical yoga psychology work explains how yoga interventions actually can work at the Annamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh, certainly at Pranamaya Kosh, and also result into strengthening and more profound experience of Anandamaya Kosh of ourself. So, at this stage I would also like to share how the genesis of this course occurred. We teach, this course very similar to that in School of Management in IIT Bombay. I am a faculty member there, and this picture of our corridor reflects the values perpetuated and espoused and largely practiced in our institution. This picture is of the infinity corridor. Infinity means where you can't see the beginning and end of the corridor. In the same way, here the academic leaders who have established the culture of this institution is such that you are invited, you are inspired to look at what is beyond always. Always look at what else is possible, always encouraged to transcend whatever you are doing in terms of research or in terms of teaching. Many of our colleagues are great inspiration for all of us to keep trying doing something more, something better. So, that is the value of the, and that is the place, and in the place like this, when we get opportunity to look at the course outline of any of our program, we look at what all ultimately possible in this course. So, in 2011 we undertook the revision of our MBA curriculum. I teach in the management department. We offer Master of Business Administration course. This is a flagship program. And in 2011 we were looking at how we can restructure, how we should restructure our existing course that time. So, naturally, as the part of the course restructuring, we looked at the best courses being taught around the world, we looked at what are the management challenges, what are the future competencies required, what kind of development is required, what kind of preparation is required for the students to face the world they are going to enter after this program. And that made us realize that self-management is deeply linked to career management. And when we say self-management, this is not only about time management, it is about managing our emotions, our energies, our intellect as well. So, as a result of this realization, we included a core course on self-management and interacting with the world. This course takes place as much in the classroom as outside of the classroom. Students are taken outside of the classroom to have a lot of experiential exercises. We do yoga protocol within the classroom. We also have some outdoor activities. Many of those activities now, because of the COVID situations, are converted into form of simulation, but yoga is still very much integral part of this course. So, that is where we examined the possibilities and discovered the ways of integrating positive psychology and yoga based interventions and insights and wisdom of yoga tradition in a single course. That was helpful because IIT Bombay has very thriving yoga ecosystem as well. What do I mean by yoga ecosystem? Institutional club have embraced yoga as a very critical intervention for the well-being of all the campus residents, be it students, faculty members, employees and their families. So, we organized yoga camps, yoga programs very regularly. I have had opportunity to be the founding faculty member of this Yogastha club. Every year we also organize conference where we discuss the research findings related to yoga based interventions, particularly those research findings which have direct implication in education and the working life. So, because of all these things available in the institution, we could create a course which integrates positive psychology and yoga. That is where we are teaching, that is what we are teaching in last 8 years. This teaching and this course has resulted into large number of research studies as well. In this course, we examined how mindfulness and yoga based interventions can be very useful in remaining in keeping our students engaged in the academic sense. We also looked at how yoga can build the altruistic behavior. We examined what actually connects positive psychology and yoga, and we found that subjective vitality and self transcendence, these are the two things which connect positive psychology and yoga. We also looked at yoga can enhance our moral reasoning. Moral reasoning is the foundation of ethical decision making. Moral reasoning refers to the reasoning or logic we give to justify any act is right or wrong. Reasoning can be at very personal level, which is called pre-conventional reasoning, that is dependent on my personal loss and personal benefit. Reasoning can also be dependent on following rules and regulation or following norms of my in-group. Reasoning can also be dependent on the universal values and our way of looking at life as a responsible citizen. That means looking at putting the universal lens on our individual act. What if everybody in this situation start acting in this situation, whether the world will be a better place or not, that becomes our criteria. So, there can be different levels of moral reasoning. Moral reasoning result into certain type of ethical behavior. It influences ethical behavior. So, ethics can be very utilitarian, it can be based on our discursive ethics, it can also be based on ethics of care. Yoga practice and mindfulness practice we saw can help us to move up from the lower level of moral reasoning to higher level of moral reasoning. We also looked at how human being can actually flourish. What is the left side? What is the antecedent of human flourishing? What can make the positive psychology intervention effective? What can enhance the impact of positive psychological experiment? And we found that yoga can be that intervention which can enhance many other positive psychological intervention. We also tried to redefine the well-being at the context of workplace as well as in the context of the educational setting. These pursuits were recognized in some of the media platforms. Times of India, Hindu published stories on these courses and our research findings about how these yoga based intervention can be helpful to the student fraternity. Similar courses are also offered in XLRI, in IIM Kozhikode. In IIM Ahmedabad as well, 2 courses were conceived which integrate mindfulness and positive psychology. Professor Vishal Gupta and Dr. Rajesh Chandwani, they are offering electives, well subscribed electives, where they integrate positive psychology and yoga based interventions. So, in light of all this, I wish to conclude this session by projecting the course objective and expectations from the participants. Our course objective, as you must have recognized by now, is to make the participant recognize the different aspect of human self and how they influence each other. This course is aimed at helping participant to comprehend what positive psychology is and how it differs from conventional or traditional psychology. It help participant to interrogate the Indian yogic perspective of managing self and career. It made people to appreciate the complementarity of positive psychology and yoga for profession, academic and day to day life. It aims at helping participant to practice the insights, and since the focus of this course is not only conceptual knowledge, but to practice, we will be having lot of psychometric assessments, case analysis, we will be having the journaling exercises, we will be providing material for practice, there will be lot of opportunities for the self reflection. These things will work only if you take this course with full sincerity. So, please ensure that course is taken where least interruption is there and the best internet connectivity is there. As most of the content are related to yourself, please ensure that you spend few minutes on each slide or each aspect of the lecture. You can pause the lecture to make sense of whatever is being told. You are most welcome to pose the question, as this course is going to be offered in the NPTEL form as well. There will be an opportunity for the face to face interaction. In case something requires more clarification, you are most welcome to pose these questions in the face to face conversation. Please always keep pen, pencil and paper to make notes and also to carry out some exercises. I will be requesting you to make some grade or write down few things or draw something that will be helpful for our reflection. Please follow those and you will realize that the greater value is being created in this kind of interaction. Spend time on the psychometric assessment. As a part of the course, you will be getting links for a lot of psychometric assessment. Some or maybe large part of the assessment will be supported by automated responses on the interpretation of the courses. But there can also be opportunity for the face to face interaction to further understand the insights arising from your psychometric assessment. Feel free to look out for the learning and insights. This course on this platform is aimed at starting the process or strengthening the process or boosting the process of self management and career management. You are already doing it, please continue that. But be mindful, this course might help you to look at the clues, look at the concepts, interpret things using the concepts discussed in the course, and you may get insights about managing self and managing career. You may get insights about the positive psychology not only from this book, not only from the research papers being quoted here, not only from the textbook prescribed here. It can be got, and be mindful, be open to receive that. You can find it from the films, from the web series, from other books. You can find the insights based reflecting on your conversations with other individuals in your day to day life. So, these are the prerequisites of this course.